The honourable member from Sherwood for Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we've had a lot of bills brought before this legislature since I got here. And may I just say, this may be the best and most relevant one. Now, I'm not sure if it's going to pass the full sniff test, but it's relevant, Mr. Speaker. When I got elected to this assembly, I did not predict some of the things we would be talking about.
You did, and
I'm going to try to be easy on some of the comments I make on Bill 20 and Bill 50, Minister, but we're first going to dig into why water is so important and why I'm so grateful to have a bill brought to this legislature that has been brought forward and consulted. Not since the LGFF have we seen policy that has been so robust and thought through in this legislature. So, Mr. Speaker, when I have thought of some of the importance of water, I do know that it's not only just important, it's critical to our growth, to our life here, and we can get very esoteric here, but in real terms, like when I look at our industrial heartland, it is 100% limited by the ability to bring additional water plants into that region because growth cannot happen, economic growth cannot happen in that region without the addition of access to water and good water. And when we're looking at some of the things that are being talked about for growth in the future with AI data centers, that is not possible without water. So economic growth is 100% dependent on water. So if I just dig in a little bit to the bill, though, and I saw the minister was happy to rise up and comment on things. We're opening up the Water Amendment Act, which I think for the minister, for everybody here, is an extremely important thing to look at. There is a comment, I had a question for the minister just right off the beginning. It talks about the return flow, means an amount of water returned by a licensee to a source of water or to the environment following the diversion of water. And I'm just wondering why you're not talking about water basins in this and what that broad term of environment means when you're talking about the ability to return water into a water basin, why we're not being more specific about water basin and just being broad about the environment. There is an interesting comment with regards to capturing precipitation. And I think that's an interesting thing that we brought precipitation into it. And I'm just wondering if you can capture precipitation with because it talks about precipitation that is intercepted above the ground and captured by work, so some sort of physical plant. Can you capture precipitation in one water basin and divert it immediately into another? And that's a curiosity that is brought as a question when I look at the meaning of this, because I'm not sure I can imagine what the situation is that you need to highlight that precipitation is water. I think that's self-explanatory. So I would love some explanation from the minister on those 2 points. Mr. Speaker, I think the third point that I'd love to get some highlights and clarity from the minister on is water for reuse. So this feels like this is where we're getting into an area that's going to probably raise some flags. And it talks about water for reuse means water-based liquid. So, Mr. Speaker, you can pour beer on a plant, but that doesn't mean it's going to grow. So are we talking about water? Or are we talking about brine or something else? What does it mean by water-based liquid? This is something that I feel like really needs to be highlighted, and I don't know if it comes into definition or if it's just something that flows. You can pour it back from one water basin to another, which raises some alarm or some warnings about what's good for the environment in that case. So those are things that I would welcome to hear from the minister on this bill. And in case the minister doesn't want to get up now, then I'm just going to get into why I think this bill is so much more important than some of the other legislation that we've faced because water is so important.
Mr. Speaker, I'm curious if the member would appreciate an interjection. I'm always hesitant to interrupt, but in this case, I'm also very eager and ready and willing to interject and provide some additional comments. And so I do appreciate the member's questions, especially on things like rainwater, return flow, and water for reuse. And this was something this was an area of the legislation that was largely brought up by municipalities. So when we look at, first of all, I'll speak to return flow and how that also works to make more water available. Of course, we rely on return flows for supporting overall water management and including that water is available for downstream uses and environmental needs as well. Of course, transboundary commitments would be included in that too. So these amendments help us to manage that water in a more integrated way, and that does include rainwater, stormwater, wastewater, as well as return flows. This then allows us to go and define what that is, what the parameters would be, how we can ensure environmental protection in those regulations in the accompanying regulations, and that helps us protect and reuse more water.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hope later on I can find out what that means by, what was that? Not water, but water-based liquids, which we've clarified doesn't always help plants grow. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, some of the other legislation that's not been as good as addressing amendments to the Water Act has largely been brought in, it feels like, for virtue signaling, ideological pandering, and advancing policies and initiatives that cost Albertans money. And so I'm glad to have something brought in that is worthy of debate in this House. Instead of just removing transparency and accountability for the government, we're dealing with something that's important. How we deal with land use, how we deal with water use, fundamentally important to what this legislature gathers together for. We know that there is importance with regards to the impacts on our life, on agriculture. When we're going around in the combine this fall harvesting and talking about the yield and the quality of the harvest coming from the farmers, even there's a farm in Sherwood Park that is growing canola. Then what the yield is dependent on the water, and so the ability of us to manage our water well is going to depend on our agricultural industry to grow or to survive in this province. Oil and gas has an enormous number of uses. I know sometimes when I'm talking to my friends that work in the oil and gas industry, they really think they're actually they're not drillers or diggers. What they are is managers of water, because that's critical to the extraction of those hydrocarbons from the ground. For example, you might have freeze-ups in a hole that you actually have to make sure that you inject ethanol down into the hole just to keep the oil flowing. Otherwise, the water will freeze the hole and you'll lose production out of a well. And so the ability of us to manage our water smartly in examples like that is going to be important. And then we're going to have to weigh the importance of the ability to keep a well going versus another competing use for water. Electricity, it's key. We all know that, I think. We've removed coal-fired power from the grid, which is exceptional. It's been good for the health of all Albertans. We've gotten, asthma levels are down in Red Deer, Mr. Speaker, because in Wabamun they're not burning coal anymore, but they are burning using natural gas, and gas-fired steam generation is still going to be using water. So the ability to manage water and water basins is going to be impactful on our electricity generation. And when we're looking to modern fuels that transport energy like hydrogen is going to be coming from H2O. We're going to be cracking the hydrogen out of water. And so the ability to have access to water, and back to the Alberta Industrial Heartland and what we're focused on there, that access to water is going to be critical to development of hydrogen production, which is critical as a feedstock to refineries in the area, and maybe an interesting way that we mix into our natural gas and heating in our province. So our growth is dependent on our ability to manage water. Forestry is going to be very concerned with how we are managing water between water basins. because the fibers that are going to be coming from our forest is going to be impacted by the amount of water that we have. And then back to data centers. I think one of the more interesting things, Mr. Speaker, is that for data centers, the water needs to be treated water. So we're not just talking about precipitation and water thrown through the river. There's processes that are going to go in place to make sure that we have treated water that can go into these high-tech data centers. And our ability to manage our water with our Water Act is going to be incredibly important. And in municipalities, everything from, I mean, it might not be obvious to everybody, but we need ice actually to pour concrete in this and make our roads in this province. And so ice isn't just for recreation; it's also critical to construction. So, what's that? Yeah. So having good management of our water is not going to just it's going to affect not just our drinking water and our ability to use water in household uses and commercial uses, but it's going to affect the municipalities' abilities to build. These are the important things that we're facing. And then at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we are also dealing with the headwaters in the Rocky Mountains, and the glaciers are melting, and that forecast is not changing. It continues to be something that those glaciers are shrinking year after year. The amount of snow that we have in snowpack is going to affect what flows into our rivers. That's where the beginning of our water comes. The amount of precipitation we have that feeds the rivers along the way is also going to be impactful. So whenever we're talking about switching water from one water basin into another, it's critical that there's a lot of oversight and there's involvement of the legislature. So it feels like with this bill that there has been some good thought process brought into that. Then in some certain positions and in some water basins, it's prescriptive at the level you would think of as regulation as to what can be approved for water transfer. And then the rest still needs to be brought before the legislature if it's not prescribed within the bill, which is how I read it. So I'm hoping I'm reading that right. And I think, if we think about the phrase, like, as long as the river flows, when we look outside below at the North Saskatchewan River, I think you could walk across that river in some points here in Edmonton right now, because there is a lot less water than I'm used to seeing on the North Saskatchewan River. It's been enjoyable to have a fall where we've had really nice weather for things like trick-or-treating and enjoying a playoff run and watching baseball games outside with your friends. But you get a little bit alarmed with the lack of water that we have in our environment. So, Bill 7 that's been brought forward, we get to compare it to something else that's been some of the other things that have been brought forward, which are not as important. Like the bill that brought tax increases in by referendum in this province, Mr. Speaker. But then the government ignored the fact that they could raise property taxes by 60% without taking that to referendum. So that felt like Bill 1 wasn't really that worthy of our debate. And then we had Bill 8, which invited corruption into the offices of the Premier and the Cabinet. Really not worthy of our debate. But coming back to water, when I think of all the uses we have for water, phenomenal place to be discussing it. I hope that land use comes up, because Alberta's probably ready for an overarching discussion about how we use land use. We haven't looked at water for 25 years, as the minister pointed out. I don't know if we've looked at land overall in our province since we were 1 million people. We're at 5 million people now, Mr. Speaker. How we use our land may be different than decades ago, and it's probably worth planning for the next 100 years for this province. We had a debate here on Consumer Protection Act for life leases, but there are people strung out with their life leases in this province because we didn't take the opportunity to help people with existing life leases. It was a missed opportunity in this legislature. We brought in some legislation that brought political parties. Oh, Mr. Speaker, I think if the minister heard something else from earlier that we want to discuss, that sounds good.
As the member has gone on a slight departure to talk about other bills he wished or would not like to have seen in the legislature, I thought that might be an appropriate point to jump in and answer the question that he asked before. Now, any of the members opposite who had the honor of serving in government likely know a little bit about the curse of legislative drafting. So the lawyers, there are many that work in government and help us with the drafting of legislation, advise that this is the best definition we could use. We cannot say water when water refers to water for reuse. Welcome to legal legislative drafting. And so this was the best and most appropriate way that the legislative drafters said that we could use that definition in the legislation. So thank you for the opportunity to jump in and provide a fun fact and some interesting process and background on why the wording is what it is. We are not referring to anything other than water for reuse.
Speaker, now I'm more worried. I'm worried that a microbrewery in Sherwood Park is going to take water, ship it into Athabasca, and that's going to be called water transfer. Mr. Speaker, how are we doing for time now? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to raise some questions. I appreciate the Minister responding to some of them here in debate, and I look forward to discussing it further during bill debate as we go through the process of legislation.